if it's New Year's Eve, instead of thinking, what do I want to do for New Year's Eve, you think, what is Daniela doing for New Year's Eve? And we need to be there, and we need to get the equipment together, and we need to get a ride there, and it might be halfway across Japan, and we have to be there. And we can't just do a production schedule and film everything in a month and be done.
Welcome to Japan Station. My name is Tony Vega. After a 52-day journey, a ship called the Kasatomaru arrived in the port of Santos in Brazil on June 18, 1908. Aboard that ship were nearly 800 immigrants from Japan in search of a better future. They were there to work in the coffee plantations because Brazil was in the midst of a coffee boom, and they needed laborers. So in 1907, they looked to Japan to fill that need, and Japan was happy to oblige. In 1868, Japan had abolished its feudal system, ushering a new age with the Meiji era, but things weren't quite so simple. There was political turmoil and food shortages and widespread poverty. That led to many people leaving their homes in Japan and going abroad in search of a better future. They went to Hawaii and Peru and Brazil. So after the Kasatomaru arrived, hundreds of thousands of Japanese ended up making their way to Brazil. And by 2014, it's estimated that there were around 1.5 million people of Japanese descent living in Brazil. In the 1990s, the tables turned, so to speak, and Brazilians started making their way to Japan in search of a better future. They wanted to work over there, earn money, maybe come back to Brazil after working there a number of years, buying a home and starting a business with that money they had earned in Japan. But life in Japan was not easy. It was tough. There was manual labor. They were working in factories. And this is an aspect of Japanese society that most of us have no idea about, and even fewer of us get to see firsthand. But my guests today, well, they're experts on the subject. They are the team that produced a documentary called One Day We Arrived in Japan. It was released in 2017, and it follows the lives of 3 Brazilian families as they try to, carve out a place for themselves and build a future for themselves in Japan. They work there, and they go there with all these hopes and dreams, thinking that things are going to be great and they can learn about the culture and earn some money. But the reality is a lot more complicated than that. It's a really gripping, compelling, emotional documentary, and it really fleshes out these people that you just hear about in passing, right? You've probably heard at some point that there's a big group of Brazilians living in Japan, but do you really know who these people are? Do you really know what they do? No, but this documentary, it paints a really interesting picture of them. And I really recommend that you should go watch it. So you can go to onedaywearrivedinjapan.com, go click on where to watch it, or you can just go to Vimeo and look up One Day We Arrived in Japan. But before you do that, how about you listen to this episode? So my guest today, I have 3 guests. Aaron Litvin, he is the producer, director, and cinematographer. Ana Paula Kojima Hirano, she is an editor, director, and cinematographer, and Marlom Meirelles. He's an editor, creative consultant, and producer. And the 3 of them, they share their stories about making this documentary, which took them 10 years to make. They spent 10 years following the lives of these families and editing just hundreds of hours of footage. It's an incredible project that, I don't know how they pulled this off, right? But what they ended up with in the end is really remarkable and really unique. So again, go watch that after you listen to this episode. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Here is Aaron, Ana Paula, and Marlon. Enjoy.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
So let's start with kind of like something basic, and I'm not sure if perhaps this would be something Aaron might best answer, or Ana Paula. But so how did this project come about? And also, can you give the listeners a little background of Brazilians and Japanese immigration to Brazil and all this, like this connection? I think many people might not be too aware of that.
Sure, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. So this is something that I became interested in back in college. I guess this will give away how old I am, but this is around 2003 when I became interested in this topic, and I was studying Portuguese and Japanese and Brazilian culture and Japanese culture, and I learned about this movement, this migration from Japan to Brazil. It started at the beginning of the 20th century as people left Japan, were leaving Japan due to unemployment, overpopulation, and seeking opportunities in Brazil. And then toward the end of the century, the direction switched, and Japan needed labor, and Brazilians were willing to go abroad to work, and essentially the Japanese government passed a law allowing Japanese descendants, so the children and grandchildren of Japanese citizens from overseas, to go to Japan to work legally. And I was fascinated by how far apart the countries are geographically, culturally, and that there was so much movement between the two. So I started doing research on this. And then I realized that the research was only conveying so much. I wanted to show the faces of the people that I was meeting, and not just talk about statistics and trends, but to show the lives of some of the migrants.
So, Ana Paula, so I guess you're of Japanese ancestry, born in Brazil? Is that?
Yes. So, yeah, actually when I joined the project with Aaron, I was not studying migration. I was actually studying transformation in the world of labor. I was an economist, and I was really interested in documentary filmmaking, and I really like documentary films. And but I'm also of Japanese descent, so
Brazilian.
I mean, I am Brazilian I'm a Brazilian of Japanese descent.
Yeah.
And so when Aaron and I started filming the project, I also had some contacts, for example, with aunts and uncles and people who actually were part of this migration movement from Brazil to Japan. And that was very interesting to me as well as a project. Even though in the beginning I thought I tried to be a bit distant from that, because I was researching and studying different things. But at the same time, I think throughout the process of making the film and throughout the end of the film, I could see how much also of my own family history was involved in the film as well, in different ways.
So did you grow up with a lot of Japanese culture in your household and as you were, as a child?
So actually at first I thought I didn't. So because I actually went to schools where I was pretty much one of the very few people of Japanese descent. And, as we know in Brazil, everybody can be Brazilian. So you are born in Brazil and you are Brazilian. You don't keep thinking that you are Japanese Brazilian or Italian Brazilian. You're just Brazilian. At the same time, I think later, and also I think throughout the process of making the movie and the film, and I think as I started growing up and becoming older, I started realizing that actually there are a lot of things that are also from the Japanese culture that I also embrace in my life, as in relation to food or to some other things. But in general, and I always considered myself Brazilian, never had any doubts about not being Brazilian.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see that a lot in, Peru, for example, or even here in Hawaii. There was the big immigration for like the plantations, and people just come to see themselves as American or Peruvian. But there's always some layer of, I think, Japanese culture, Japanese teachings, that make their way into like the family life, I guess. But yeah, so that's something I think is pretty interesting. It's always kind of there, but you also assimilate, and then this whole phenomenon of going back to Japan. And then you're like kind of neither, like you don't feel fully Japanese, but then you look Japanese. And then so you're kind of held to a different standard. And it's a very complicated space to be in, at least I feel from as an outsider looking in at this phenomena.
Yeah, So when I went to Japan, I never had any doubts of not being Brazilian. So for me, that was not really a question, but I can see some people sometimes asking those questions to themselves, especially because, physically we are Asian. So of course, like when we are in the Western world, being physically Asian, sometimes people put you in a box and think that you belong to that box, even though, you know, we are much more than what is inside or outside of the box. But, and my father was actually already born in Brazil. So we didn't really speak Japanese at home. So when I went to Japan, I really felt Brazilian. But it's interesting though what you're saying, because when we were in Japan making the film, Aaron speaks better Japanese than me, and constantly they would answer, like Aaron would ask a question in Japanese and they would answer looking at me, even though his Japanese was better than mine.
Yeah, it's like, why aren't you talking to us? Why is this guy talking to us?
Yes.
Interesting. Marlom, had you had any exposure to Japanese culture or anything like that before joining in on this project?
Not really. Actually, the only contact I had before joining this project was when I was training karate when I was a kid. So I only knew how to count from 1 to 10 in Japanese. But I could easily relate to the subject because I'm from a very traditional background. I live in a small town in Brazil. Yeah. So once I got to know this subject, when I started working with Aaron and Ana Paula, I've always felt like I didn't belong when I was younger. So I could relate to that feeling when Brazilians were traveling to Japan and they didn't feel like they belonged to that culture.
Interesting. So was it like you were interested in other things that the other kids weren't interested in? Like what do you think? Like why was that you felt like you could relate?
Oh, also because I'm a gay man, and it is I'm from a small town. People are very traditional, so it wasn't really an issue for me. But I could feel that something was different, and I can relate to that.
Right. No, yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. All right, so let's see. So let's go back to Aaron. When you decided to start this, like, was it you just by yourself? Had you met Ana Paula? Like, were you thinking this is going to be something that takes me like 10 years? Like, what was the thought process behind all this?
So Ana Paula and I were both students at the University of Sao Paulo at the time, and there was no film or idea for the film, just the research topic that I was doing. And Ana and I started talking about how this was really an ideal way to approach this topic, to be able to show the migrants themselves. I was planning on going from Sao Paulo to Japan, and Ana was also planning to study abroad in Japan. And we thought, well, as long as I'm studying this topic, and we both have some interest in this topic, and I'm about to go from Sao Paulo to Japan, just as many Brazilians of Japanese descent are about to do. And what if we find them? Let's try to find them before they go to Japan, interview them, get to know them, and then catch up with them again in Japan and interview them again there, follow their lives, see what happens. Because it's something was bound to change dramatically in their lives. It's really for someone who for people who have been in Brazil their whole life and then suddenly decide, I have this opportunity to go to Japan, I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to work in Japan and see what happens. And we knew that things would transform in their lives, so we wanted to get to know them and follow those stories and capture those stories. We didn't think it would be 10 years, right? I think I thought maybe 2 or 3 years at most, and it just kept going because things kept happening in their lives, and we kept editing and never finalizing the project. And it was like, well, as long as we're still working on the project. We should get more material. We should see what they're up to now, and that continued until filming finally ended in, about 8 years later.
Wow.
Or actually 10 years later. Yeah, it was the whole filming spanned a decade.
At what point did Marlom come on the project?
Yep. So I think that one of the key things in this project was that we found Marlom. Marlom is, I'm saying this because he's not going to say it himself, but but he's a very, very talented filmmaker, and an editor and director, producer, and so for him to look at this material not only with fresh eyes from the perspective of someone who wasn't there on filming, but also someone who knows so much about and has such sensibility for film, really, I think, was key to making this into not just material but a compelling film. And we met Marlom, I think, about 2015 or so. In Brazil, and then we started working together on the editing.
So Marlom, when they told you I have like 8 years of footage, do you want to work on this project with us? Like,
I had to sit down, otherwise I would have fell.
So, like, how many hours? Like, what was the process like?
Well, it was very intense. Actually, it was a bit hard for me in the beginning to understand how personal this project was to both of them, to Aaron and also to Ana Paula. We had many. Well, first of all, we had a first cut. So Aaron was working on the material much before the moment when I joined them. So sometimes it's harder when you start to work on a project once it is in the development.
Right.
You understand? Not from the beginning. So I think it was
you can't like fix the mistakes before they happen, so to speak. You can't like guide it before you tell them like maybe you should do it this way, maybe you should do it this way. It'll be easier in post and that sort of advice, right?
Right, especially because when it comes to filming, it is very important to think about the post production from the very first moment. So it was a challenge, and Aaron, thank you for the compliments. You made me a bit embarrassed when you said that in front of me, but thank you very much. It was a very good dynamic between us. Working on different cuts and consulting, both of them. I had a lot of freedom on this project, creative freedom. So I could suggest a lot of changes on the narrative of the film. And Aaron and Ana Paula were always also suggesting things. And then we had other editors working on the fine cuts. So many different hands were working on this project.
So about how many hours of footage was there in total?
More than 100, for sure.
Okay. And it was like, because there's parts where it's like home video camera, and then I don't know like what equipment like Aaron and Ana Paula were using, but it's all just a bunch of different stuff like put together, right?
Yes, we had DVD. We had mostly mini DV. There were some footage in digital files and also some VHS files. So we had to capture a lot of material and render. So, it was really hard working on different formats.
Wow. Okay. Did you get frustrated at any point?
Yes, I went straight to therapy.
So, Aaron, Ana Paula, like, what was the process like of finding like the people that you follow, the families that you follow? Like how many people in total did you end up following? But then I guess you must have found a bunch of other people too that didn't make it into the movie and all that.
Yes. I don't know if Aaron wants to answer. I can start and then maybe Aaron can add. So yeah, we started filming actually lots of families. And in the end, we have much less than the ones that we started filming. So we found them in language classrooms and also in centers for people who were going to Japan, to work in Japan. And then also in agencies that also hire those people who are going to work in Japanese factories. So we went to all those places to try to find people who were going for the first time from Brazil to Japan. And then we tried to convince them to participate, which was also something hard because sometimes they don't want to expose themselves, in front of the camera and about what they are going to do. So we had to first convince them to participate, and also throughout the process of making the film, we had some families who decided not to continue participating in the film. And then in the process of editing, there were also some that we also end up not putting in the final cut of the film. But maybe Aaron can add more to the process of finding the people that stayed with us in the end of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as Ana Paula said, there were some people we started interviewing and filming back in Sao Paulo who later decided not to participate. Some of them didn't get their visas to go to Japan. Some of them dropped out months later. So we had a lot of that material that we couldn't use. We ended up following 5 families and for over 2 years, and we felt it was too much for the final film to have so many different people and different families. It was hard to keep track, and we decided to just include 3 of the families in the film. And the stories of the other 2 we did edit, and Marlom did great work on those as well, and those are available as bonus features. If you go to watch the film, it's at One Day We Arrived in Japan.com. And when you go there, if you rent the film, then you can watch it and also see those other stories of the other migrants who weren't included in the film.
So what did you... Okay, so the style of the documentary was really striking to me in that there's no narration. You just let the people kind of tell their own story, so to speak. Like they talk to the camera and things happen on screen. For example, there's the one family that they had home video footage, and you let that footage just play and you see it happen as they're describing it. What motivated that style to go with that style of the documentary rather than trying to, like I said, have a narration or something like that? Was that perhaps Marlom saying like, you guys should try this out, or was that an idea that you guys had from the beginning?
Sure. The idea of not having narration was actually from the beginning, from when we started making the film. There were some filmmakers that we admire a lot, including, for example, Eduardo Coutinho, who is a very famous Brazilian filmmaker, and he usually don't use narration in his films. And we also preferred that style in our film, not having voice-off or voice-over, but also just have the sounds that are in the film to appear in the film. Maybe Aaron can also say something about the style of the film and how we made our decisions.
I think part of it was, what can we do in this film that could not be done in a news report, or when we decided to really focus on the migrants and their lives and not have other people talking over them or other people talking about them, and really just have it be about their lives. And it's, I think that when you impose that sort of limitation, then you find creative ways around it. you find ways to include information that you want to include without having a talking head or a voiceover. I can give you an example. For example, we wanted to explain how these employment agencies work, like these agencies in Sao Paulo that arrange the contracts and help the migrants travel to Japan and finance their tickets. And so rather than just interview someone from that agency or have a voiceover, we got a scene in the airport in which one of those agents is talking to a group of migrants, including someone we were following, and telling them, okay, guys, here's what's going to happen. Here are your tickets. You're going to go to Japan, and someone's going to meet you there and take you to your apartments, and then set you up with the people who will bring you to the factory. And they were talking to the protagonists and the migrants. And so we managed to include that information without cutting away from the migrant story.
Right. Yeah. Like the whole opening is them learning about, the whole process of applying to go work in Japan, right? Like that was really interesting to me, getting to see that kind of behind the scenes, what so many people go through in order to get to Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say was the most challenging aspect to you guys, to Aaron, Ana Paula, of making this? Like, 10 years, like it seems like there's a lot of problems that come up along the way, but what are some things that stick with you that you go like, wow, that was really hard, but somehow we managed to get through it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'd say for me the toughest thing was in making a longitudinal documentary, in which you're trying to follow people's lives for years. What happens is it becomes your life. There you have to be where they are. You spend your vacations following them. If it's New Year's Eve, instead of thinking, what do I want to do for New Year's Eve, you think, what is Daniela doing for New Year's Eve? And we need to be there, and we need to get the equipment together, and we need to get a ride there, and it might be halfway across Japan, and we have to be there. And we can't just do a production schedule and film everything in a month and be done. So it becomes very personal for that reason, and we need to have relationships with the participants and make sure that they're comfortable with the process and they're willing to continue filming. And so it's really, I think for me, the most challenging thing was how much making this film affected my life.
Yeah, I would say the same as Aaron. Yeah, the process of making the film was also something that involved completely our own lives. And then we were also following them and also migrating ourselves, to follow them as well, and also follow them throughout their activities and the things that they were doing. That was a very big challenge. And then moving to different countries,
right,
and adapting ourselves as well in different countries.
Mm-hmm. Marlom, I have a slightly different question for you, as I know you, of course, dealing with so much footage and all that, like we discussed, that was, of course, I'm sure very challenging. And also like dealing with Japanese language footage, you said, 1 through 10, right? there were a lot of elementary school scenes, I remember. And there's this one scene where Bruno's speaking in Japanese, right? One of the main characters, the child that you see at the beginning, and then he grows up, he has a scene where he's speaking in Japanese. But aside from those challenges, or rather, what did those challenges teach you? Like, what did you learn from taking on this project? Like, you're used to doing your own projects, I believe, right? As a director and doing your own things, but then you jumped like 8 years into this project. What did you walk away learning from this project?
What did I walk away? Well, actually, I was starting to get my driver's license at that time. And just to add how the project can affect our own lives, I wasn't able to finish. So,
oh wow,
I don't have my driver's license due to this film.
That's sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a huge sacrifice. And there is a lot of bullying from my friends because I'm a 30 years old man and I don't have my driver's license. So thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Ana Paula, and thank you to the Brazilian Japanese community as well.
But I guess that just speaks to you wanted to do a good job with this project, right? You wanted to do something good, something meaningful. So you looked at things and like okay, maybe I can't get the driver's license, but I want to get this done. I want to make sure this is something good, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, I was just kidding.
Yeah.
But it is a very good project. I was very tempted to working on this project with them since the very first moment. Because I really love challenges, and I work as a teacher in Brazil. I work mostly on documentaries. So I take short courses to the countryside in the state where I live. So I've been doing it for 10 years now. And it was a good moment for me to stop my project a little bit and really jump into this interesting story. So, I didn't consider not joining them on the project, to be honest.
Wow, oh, that's great. All right, so I have kind of two questions as we're wrapping up, but I'm curious about the status of immigration to Japan now. Like, has that remained stable? Do you guys know if there's been, an increase or a decrease? Has there been any change in recent years?
So actually, when we went to start making the film, there were about 300,000 Brazilians of Japanese descent and their spouses living in Japan. And then throughout the process of making the film, this number dropped because there was the economic crisis of 2008 in the world, including Japan. And a lot of people actually returned. Not a lot, but some people returned, and a lot of people were not able to go to Japan to work. And then I think that later, the number has maybe increased a bit. I'm not sure. Maybe Aaron can say something about it, but
I think it's about 200,000 now, so it has rebounded a bit, but it's not at the level that it was before that economic crisis.
And the documentary makes this pretty clear, but I've also seen this through my experiences because I have relatives that are of part Japanese, part Peruvian living in Tokyo, and I've met many Peruvians of Japanese ancestry, but it's very difficult to get used to life over there for many of them. From just going from your experiences and your own research, why is that? Why do Brazilians or I guess Peruvians too have that difficulty adjusting to life in Japan?
I would say that there are several reasons. I think that, you have to think that they are already Brazilians or Peruvians. And then a lot of them has the language barrier, but also the cultural barrier as well. So I think that when the Japanese government started accepting second and third generation of Japanese descent, they thought that maybe they would still speak the language and they would still, know the culture. But in fact, that was not what happened. And so a lot of the people who went to Japan to work in the factories had a lot of problems adapting and a lot of difficulties to actually feel included in the life in Japan. Also, they work sometimes more than 70, 80 hours per week. So they are constantly in the factories. They don't have much time to spend outside of the factories. What else? I think Aaron can also add more, because it's related to his research.
Yeah. Well, one of the things the research showed, I did surveys and interviews, and it showed that many people ended up staying in Japan a lot longer than they had initially planned to. So many people said, well, I went to Japan planning to stay 1 or 2 years just to save up some money and then go back to Brazil and start a business or something else. And but they were still there 5-10 years later. And so I think that when you go to a place without the intention of staying, even as the years pass and you stay there, you're not as invested in learning the language and learning about the country and the culture. Which is not to criticize at all. It's just that when intentions change like that, it's hard to know how much yourself to invest in a future in a country that you don't plan to stay in.
Yeah, and one of the, I think it happened a couple times in the movie. I think it was Paula that she was, well, I remember
Ana Carolina.
Carolina. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes, Carolina. That she was speaking on the phone with her parents and crying, because she missed them so much. And within, I haven't been to Brazil, but I get the feeling that it's not all that dissimilar from a lot of other Latin American countries where family is a very big deal. Spending a lot of time with your family, being very expressive is just part of how you build those relationships, and not being able to do that, not being able to spend those important dates with your family is very, very hard for people in that situation. And yet they still decide to stay there. So it's this very tough push and pull that they find themselves in, it seems.
Yes, yeah, I think that they go thinking about making some money and then maybe coming back so that they can have a better life in Brazil, but not really moving to actually, live in Japan. So I think that, and then the fact that sometimes it takes much longer than they expect to make the amount of money that they expected to make, I think that causes them a lot of frustrations. And then also I think that it has also a relationship to do with what I said before about being, when people put other people inside the boxes. So I think that when you are of Japanese descent, maybe there is the expectation that because you look Japanese, that you would also know the culture, you would also know the language. And we could see that in a lot of cases, and also in our documentary, for example, Paulo, who was not of Japanese descent, adapted much better in Japan than Carol, who was of Japanese descent. And I can also see when I was living there that, when someone who doesn't look Asian speaks Japanese, they are praised and people say wow, how did you learn?
They go crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then if you look Asian and you cannot speak Japanese, they are like, how come you don't speak Japanese? How come you don't know our culture? Yeah. So I think that those things also sometimes makes things harder also for the ones of Japanese descent that are not, able to speak Japanese and are not culturally Japanese.
Yeah. It's, I've been through that too. You just say, konnichiwa, and then you go, oh, Nihongo jozu, you're so good. It's like, no, anybody can say that. There's no reason for you to, but yeah, it happens a lot. And yeah, even if you just look Asian, immediately there's that kind of why? It's a tricky situation to be in, but, okay. So closing out, what would you guys want people to know about this movie, to get out of this documentary? Is there something that you want people to learn? What is something that you can, I'm sure there's many, many things, but if you can just say perhaps one thing, each of you, then I think that would help people get in a frame of mind before they watch the movie. So maybe we can start with Aaron. Something you'd like people to know about the documentary?
Yeah, well, first I want to thank you for inviting us to do the interview and to talk about our experience in the films. And I'd say that what I would like for viewers to take away from the film is that it's not just a documentary about Brazilian migrants in Japan. I mean, it is, but to me, it's more a documentary about what happens when people face the consequences of their own decisions, and when there's a gap between people's expectations and the outcome. And so I think the film really shows how that plays out.
Interesting. Yeah. There's plenty of scenes at the beginning where they go, I want to do this in Japan. I want to do this and this. And then you see what actually happens as the years pass by. And it's very interesting to see that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Ana Paula, anything you'd like people to keep in mind?
So thank you so much, Tony, for inviting us for the interview and for your show. And I think that the film is very current as well in the state of what's going on in the world in terms of migration. So it's not only about migration from Brazil to Japan or from Japan to Brazil. It's actually about migrating and being humans and how we move around different countries and different cultures and around the world. And I think that the film also shows this side of it. Even though it's through the lives of fewer people, we can also see how human we are, how we miss each other, how we have bonds with each other, how there is love with each other, and at the same time, how the distance and also the difficulties that we have when we face different cultures and languages can also play a big role. So I think that the film has a lot to say in terms of migration, in terms of being humans, in terms of being part of this world.
Great. Yeah. And Marlom, so we know it cost you your driver's license, but but aside from that, seeing the story of these the migrants and working with Ana Paula and Aaron, like, what would you like people to keep in mind when they see the movie?
Oh, first of all, let me follow the script and thank you for this great reunion. It's really great because since I returned to Brazil, I think it's the first time that I speak to both of them at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Aaron
So
and Ana Paula.
after we finish, I'll just let you guys talk for a while. I'll just walk away.
Yeah, we have so many things to talk about. Yeah, it feels like a divorce. We divorced and I returned to Brazil.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's many points in the movie, in the making of the film, right, where you go, no, we should do this way. And then, they go like, oh, but we want to do this. And then you have to explain to them, no, but this is why we have to do it this way.
Yeah, but going back to the subject of the film, the grass always looks greener on the other side. So it's something I can apply to the main theme of this film because all the characters, by the way, I didn't get to know them in person.
Right.
So I have so many questions I would love to make to them. But I felt like they were creating these expectations on moving to Japan, and once they got there, reality showed different sides of the dream. So it is something really interesting on the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think even you don't have to be a Brazilian immigrant or an immigrant to have expectations sometimes get a little bit out of hand, and then you go somewhere, you do something, and you realize like, oh, this isn't how things were going to turn out. Like I had something constructed in my mind, and it's really interesting to see that develop throughout the documentary and see how they deal with that reality as it sets in. So, I found the documentary very interesting for numerous reasons. One aspect is that you don't normally get to see this aspect of Japanese society. I mean, yes, they are Brazilian, but they're living in Japan and they're part of Japanese society as well. But this is not a part of society that you get to see in, for example, mainstream Japanese media, right? Like you don't see these faces. Mm-hmm. You see people talk about like, oh, Brazilians, they don't take out the trash, or that's the kind of stuff that you hear on Japanese media, right? But there is so much more to them than just those little tidbits that you get on the nightly news or something like that, or just from talking to your neighbors. So, very interesting stuff. And the best way to watch it is you go to onedaywearrivedinjapan.com. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. onedaywearrivedinjapan.com, and then click on where can I see it, and it will gives a link to watch it online.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, guys, for making time and talking to me and sharing your thoughts and experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully that wasn't too crazy. I know 3 guests is a lot. And it was actually quite challenging for me as the interviewer. I had never interviewed 3 people on at the same time like that. I have interviewed 2 people at the same time. That was all the way back in episode 1. But adding another person into the mix, it's like exponentially more difficult. But Aaron, Ana Paula, Marlom, they were all great. And their answers just made me want to keep talking to them, right? I wanted to ask more and more follow-up questions, but it's really tough to keep switching back and forth like that. But I had a great time talking to them. I I'd really love to talk to Marlom sometime. He seems like a really fun guy. But anyway, go to onedaywearrivedinjapan.com. Go watch the movie. You can click on where to watch it once you're there, and that will take you to Vimeo, the Vimeo link. And then it costs 99 cents. Come on, like that's nothing. Right? What can you get for 99 cents these days? Nothing, right? So you can rent the movie, watch it, and just learn something. Learn about these people. Like it's a really good documentary and super, just totally unique. So if you have a moment, go check it out. I really recommend it. Moving on. If you have any questions or comments for me about this episode, about any other episodes, then let me know. You can email me at mail@japanstationpodcast.com. You can also reach out via social media. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. They are now officially both at Japankyo News. Okay, I changed it, so both of them are the same right now. It's at Japankyo News. One thing that I want to mention briefly is the other day, Kevin O'Shea of the Just Japan podcast celebrated his 200th episode. I mean, that's crazy, right? He's been at this for years, way, way longer than I have. And I have just tons of respect for that. If you want to listen to more Japan-related podcast content, go. There's a whole bunch of stuff over there. Kevin has been putting out stuff for years and years and years. And he actually mentioned me the other day on the 200th episode. We were talking on Twitter and we found out that we were both living like in Kobe, about 2 buildings away from each other for 3 years when I was living in Kobe in Japan. And we never ran into each other. We were completely unaware of this. So that was just really interesting. Anyway, go look up Just Japan Podcast. You can find it anywhere where you find your podcast. So yeah, go do that. As always, thank you so much to Yunomi for providing the opening and closing song. And that does it for episode 14. Episode 15 is going to be with Gaijin Goomba. He is a YouTuber, a streamer, and an expert on Japanese culture in video games and anime, and a really nice guy who agreed to come on the show. He's been on The Game Theorist. He worked with them, a huge YouTube channel. And we had a great conversation just the other day. So that's coming out in the middle of June. So stay tuned for that. I will probably be putting that one out a little bit early because I'm going to be heading to Japan on June 12th. And I just want to get it out before I'm gone and I'm not really monitoring all my stuff, the social media and all that stuff. And one more thing before I close out. If you are still listening, then obviously you enjoy this podcast. Unless you are some sort of masochist or you have your hands tied behind your back and you can't access your phone to stop this and go to the next track, then you probably like the show, right? So you can leave a review or rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. That will really help the show keep on growing. So please, please, please consider that. Go do that. The show's almost done, so it's the perfect opportunity to do that while it's still in your head. So go ahead, do it. Anyway, that does it for episode 14. Thank you so much, and go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!